trying to do some of the peace negotiation work that I've done, that can vary differently in the sense that often you are waking up in a hotel, so you can have one very healthy meal in the morning, often like a brunch at the hotel, and then you kind of coast off that and protein bars through the day, and then you can kind of jam out with a meal at night. That was a different kind of challenge because I was often in a different country every 36 hours, sometimes in different time zones, multiple times per week. And, the first instinct is scarcity, which is to say, okay, well, then I need to sleep every second I can possibly sleep. And what I found was, no, you actually need to prioritize the exercise to keep your metabolism up in those spaces. And, first time around I was doing it, there were literally like marks on my legs from trying to pull out hair to stay awake during meetings with, heads of state and foreign ministers, because it's generally not very diplomatically sound to be yawning and falling asleep in meetings about war and peace. And what I found was when I would exercise, even if it was 3 a.m, 4 a.m, even if it was just briefly on a layover in, Addis, where you had 2.5 hours instead of sitting in the lounge, go do the calls, walking up and down the hallways. And you're just more likely to keep your body in a place where it has the kind of reservoir to draw from that.
Welcome back to United States of Sweat, presented by Choose the Hard Way. I'm Andrew Vance, and United States of Sweat is where politicians and policymakers join us to share stories about fitness, health, and the sports they love playing. In 2008, Tom Perriello won the election to represent Virginia's 5th congressional district by fewer than 1,000 votes. He later ran for governor of Virginia, and he also served as special envoy for Sudan and special envoy for the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Great Lakes, among many other acts of service. That took some serious endurance, as you will hear on this episode. Marathons, 10-day silent retreats, Spartan races, and what happens when you're forced to operate on 4 hours of sleep a night for a year while making 62 country visits to end a humanitarian crisis. This episode has it all. Tom was also the executive director of Open Society Foundations, and that's where he met my co-host for United States of Sweat, Jonathan Kaplan. Jonathan runs Essington Road Strategies, helping organizations navigate Washington, shape policy, and manage reputational risk. He also writes a fantastic Substack, Writing With. It's a newsletter and podcast exploring the intersection of pro cycling, media, business, and politics. Find that at writingwithkaplan.substack.com. You guessed it, link in show notes. The number one way to support United States of Sweat and Choose the Hard Way is to become a paid subscriber to my Substack. That is at alwaysthehardway.substack.com. That's where I share my reflections on these interviews and write about engaged mindfulness, bikes, and life. For senior execs, pro athletes, and political leaders, podcasts are not optional anymore. They are a mission-critical communication channel. At One Real Voice, I coach leaders one-on-one to help them thrive as storytellers and stand out in the long-form podcast conversations where real influence is built. When you're ready to be great, DM me at HardwayPod on Instagram, or you can email hello@onerealvoice.com. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe and do humanity a favor when you hit 5 stars. Now, let's get started with United States of Sweat. Remember, this is the beginning of this project. DM me at HardwayPod on Instagram and let me know what you think and who you would like to hear from next. With an intuitive experience and best-in-class security, blockchain.com makes crypto accessible to everyone. With over $1 trillion in crypto transactions trusted to blockchain.com to date, it's your trusted platform for buying, selling, and holding crypto, no matter your experience level. Get started today at blockchain.com. As a former communications executive at a tech unicorn valued at more than $1 billion, I can tell you that podcasting must be a core part of your communication strategy for any brand, business, or creator, who wants to connect with your audience in a meaningful way. Palm Tree Podco is my podcasting partner of choice because they do exceptional work that lets me focus on the parts of podcasting I love the most, and that's interviewing amazing guests. When you're ready to start a podcast or take your podcast to the next level, work with Palm Tree Podco. Find them at palmtreepodco.com. You can find that link in the show notes.
Had always been, very active and stayed pretty healthy until I ran for Congress at a pretty young age. I was 34. And over that period of about 2.5 years, I probably put on 30 pounds and went from, running every day, eating pretty healthy to a campaign lifestyle, and didn't have the kind of checks in place of feeling like, I would prioritize health in that situation. Some of that was, we just had the horrible market crash. And I was representing a district that's the size of New Jersey, but it was really kind of like a microcosm of the country. It was just huge geographically. And you had, the University of Virginia, still a pretty high growth area in the top part of the district. The middle was Liberty University and Falwell's territory. And the bottom was where the old factory towns were. And so every day I was meeting with people who hadn't worked in 15 years and been laid off from 5 or 6 different jobs, or people who'd been foreclosed on. And it just felt very indulgent to go and exercise. It felt like, one more minute, one more meeting, maybe I could help that, veteran get their benefits or whatever. And I think that comes from a good place in wanting to help people and wanting to make the most of opportunities to serve. But it's also a very immature notion in the sense that, not understanding that need to stay balanced. And I think the fact that I was young, single with no kids, also meant I didn't have the natural checks. We would joke with other members of Congress that the only legitimate excuse for not showing up for your constituents was family, was kids. So that time through, I knew that was something that was not sustainable. And sure, maybe that was necessary for that moment because it was not just a negative crisis and pain, but also an opportunity to pass healthcare and do other things. So in other times where I've had that level of, 100-hour plus per week intensity, it was very important to me to try to do a better job of physical health and then eventually get over my huge hangups about things like yoga and actually take, mental health and stretching seriously. So it's been a process. By the time I came in and met you, Jonathan, and that job, I was getting a little bit better about the idea of being able to protect space for that.
Before we dive into talking about a balanced approach and how you got to this point where mental health and physical wellness became more core to how you created balance for yourself during a 100-hour week, what did a day of unhealth look like, which was in the service of helping your constituents, as you noted, but what did a day look like?
It was insane, basically. You would often have 3 or 4 separate breakfasts, for example, each morning, usually around fundraising. Fundraising is way too much a part of Congress, but also constituents or constituent groups. So your first breakfast might be at 6 or 6:30 a.m. in order to be able to backstop 4 breakfasts. So you often are speaking or need to be very thoughtful in those meetings, which means not shoving your face full of a lot of food. So even though food's always around, it usually means that what you're doing is grabbing the donut on the way out of the meeting or the Danish or whatever, going into the next meeting. Then you're often at events that have, pizza and burgers. It's not exactly like you've got your arugula salad out there at most of your campaign events, at least not in my district. So, you're going through not only until well into the evening, but often that's the final chance where you can talk to your team, for example, and regroup on the day. So those meetings may not be till 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. For many people also, that's when you fundraise to the West Coast. So you can still be making fundraising calls in different time zones. For me, it was a lot of time on the road because, again, my district is only 2 hours from DC, which is nice, but then it's hours and hours to drive around it. And if you're in a truck, I did have a pickup truck at the time. It was totaled later, not my fault. Then you're sitting for a lot, right? And when you're sitting in hearings and other things, you're not being that active. Now, that's not to say that people don't do it. There are people, including guests you've had, who have been incredibly disciplined. It was one of the things I think that a lot of people, including Republicans, respected about Barack Obama was that even with literally the weight of the free world on his shoulders, he was disciplined enough that, he seemed to stay very healthy and have that routine and the rest. So, it's usually a matter of discipline. In the diplomatic, when I had similar schedules trying to do some of the peace negotiation work that I've done, that can vary differently in the sense that often you are waking up in a hotel, so you can have one very healthy meal in the morning, often like a brunch at the hotel. And then you kind of coast off that and protein bars through the day. And then you can kind of jam out with a meal at night. That was a different kind of challenge because I was often in a different country every 36 hours, sometimes in different time zones, multiple times per week. And the first instinct is scarcity, which is to say, okay, well, then I need to sleep every second I can possibly sleep. And what I found was, no, you actually need to prioritize the exercise to keep your metabolism up in those spaces. And, first time around I was doing it, there were literally like marks on my legs from trying to pull out hair to stay awake during meetings with, heads of state and foreign ministers, because it's generally not very diplomatically sound to be yawning and falling asleep in meetings about war and peace. And what I found was when I would exercise, even if it was 3 a.m, 4 a.m, even if it was just briefly on a layover in, Addis, where you had 2.5 hours instead of sitting in the lounge, go do the calls, walking up and down the hallways. And you're just more likely to keep your body in a place where it has the kind of reservoir to draw from that.
At what point did you realize that you needed to refocus, spend time on health, wellness, and what did you do?
I mean, I always wanted to do it. It was, that particular 2 years was very intense. It probably helped that the voters of the 5th District were wise enough to kick me out of office and encourage me to have a new life and had a reset there. And so pretty quickly thereafter, even really by late in the second year of that term, I was starting to exercise again because I was going crazy. And then I think I just picked a 10K and then a 10 miler and just had something to try to go for. But it was, it felt at the time for a variety of reasons like this was a once in a lifetime thing. I wasn't particularly eager to stay in politics for a long time, but there was a sense both of the scale of the crisis and the scale of the opportunity to want to make the most of that time. And I'm glad I did with that. And I've had a little bit of more of a binge and purge lifestyle professionally, where I'll go through these periods of really intense opportunities to make a difference. Whether that was, in Sierra Leone during what proved to be the end of the Civil War there and the start of the transitional justice process, or those first 2 Obama years looking at Obamacare and the preventing a Great Depression, and then other moments thereafter. So, it feels a little Forrest Gumpy in the sense that I've kind of been present at, I don't know if people even still know the Forrest Gump reference. Has that made the generational jump? Maybe not. Anyway,
it's a great question. We'll find out. If you're listening to this and you know who Forrest Gump is, send me a DM. I'm at Hardway Pod, and we'll get that information back to Tom and his skiff.
So it was just run, Forrest, run after that, in other words, Jonathan.
I mean, it's worth just saying how, because you're talking about the 2008, 2010 period, just how stressful that was. Can you sort of give voice to that and the toll that takes? I
mean, I can't give it voice as well as the people in my district or a George Packer could. I mean, it's we have to remember from the most immediate standpoint. I mean, people were losing their home, they were losing their life savings, and when you think about somebody who spent 30, 40 years to be able to set up their children to be economically secure, or even just to have a retirement, and this was not, while it was, the proximate cause was definitely the credit default swaps and the speculation, all the issues in the housing market. I think in retrospect, it became clear that this was also the coming due of 20 previous years of gutting out the middle class, in downsizing the middle class through a combination of automation, neoliberalism, and other things we don't have to get into here. But I'll give you an example. Like, I would meet with people in my district who, were like, if one more person tells me that I'm going to become a computer programmer, I'm going to punch them in the face. In the 80s, I made, this is the constituent speaking, I'd make $35 or $40 an hour making furniture. By the late 80s, I was making $25 an hour. By the early 90s, I was making $15 an hour. Then they told me to go become, get this training, that training, that training. And now I'm being told to go get a minimum wage $7.25 an hour job. So if we think of most of us over our career arcs, in a job where, you came out of high school being promised that if you worked hard and played by the rules, you were going to be able to, support your family, and your earning literally was dropping every few years for working hard on that. And some, idiots in Washington and coastal elites were just telling you how great free trade was going to be because you were going to upskill into some programming job. And so these are people just working their tails off who had just done, gone back 3-4 times, got knocked down, and went in and said, all right, I'm going to pick myself back up. And seeing that, so you had that, across particularly the southern part of my district, just really to the bone. And then you had all the problems with healthcare, of course, of people who, would tell you each day you'd wake up and you'd get the stories of people whose families had been ruined and were still trying to get care for kids with pre-existing conditions and the rest. So you internalize that for obvious reasons. And it's what made the job, I call it the worst job I ever loved in Congress, because it's an amazing thing to be in a position to potentially make a difference for people who've been struggling in that way. And it's a good feeling to be able to, but it's great power, great responsibility, et cetera. And I think the greatest compliment I ever got in Congress was being called the mayor of the 5th district, because a mayor is someone people feel like they're close enough to that they might actually meet that person. They might, be able to hear from that person and be heard by that person. But doing that again in a geographic area the size of New Jersey just meant, trying to do all that. And I was, I was a kid at the time, and tried to do as best as I could. And something had to sacrifice with that. There were also just sort of comic and tragicomic things along the way. My dad, who I was very, very close to, died suddenly about 2 months after I was sworn in, and about 3 weeks after he had retired. And I actually ended up moving back in with my mom at that point. And my sister and her family had already pre-scheduled to do a refab on their kitchen 2 miles away. So they moved in. And then my brother, who lived 4 miles away, his house flooded. And he has 4 kids, so all 6 of them moved in. Luckily, reality TV wasn't a big enough thing then, or we would have probably ended up living with the Perriello show. But, it was both an amazing experience to be in that environment and sharing that with my family, which is, paid a lot of dividends over time. But it was a very, very intense moment for my constituents and people all over. And keeping in mind, of course, that I had also worked a lot internationally, including spending time in Afghanistan, particularly with a lot of Afghan women and Afghan youth, and understanding, it wasn't just the lives in the U.S. that were affected by this, but the hopes and aspirations of the world, really, at that moment, that President Obama might be able to come in and help make a difference, globally and not just domestically.
Tom, as you noted, whether it was for your constituents who were going through this crisis moment and under a lot of pressure, or the pressure that you felt, the loss of your father, I'm sorry for your loss, and what you were experiencing during the election, and then as a member, you mentioned that there have been these periods in your life of hyper opportunity where you felt you have this potential to provide exponential value to the nation, to the people you're leading internationally, and that you've made some sacrifices, and that's impacted your health. When you look back on these moments, I know there are a lot of people listening who, at whatever level they're operating, they feel that same pressure. And with what you know now about health and wellness and setting aside time for that, would you go through those experiences the same way with kind of that disregard for your physical health and wellness, or would you do it differently?
I mean, I would do them differently, but I wouldn't not do them. And if the only option was to do them with those risks, I would do them because it's what gives us purpose. And I would also say that what works for me doesn't work for other people. Everyone's got to find their own routine on that. But yeah, I think that the sweet spot would be that we get better at this over time. And as someone who is now old as dirt, and it's a lot harder for me to maintain the energy levels as before, it does mean that I have to be more disciplined now. Like I simply can't. Then I could work 20-hour days and still be pretty functional, the next day. And now that I can't, I certainly can't sustain that. I did more of that than I probably should have on the Sudan gig. And so in order to, sadly, just to be able to do the same thing I did before, I've got to be, more efficient because age is what it is. And I can't put the same wear and tear on my body. So some of that's wisdom. And I have come to really appreciate wisdom as something we don't value enough. We tend to value a certain form of genius, and that's a good thing. It can create, it can destroy, but wisdom is something different. And I think I find myself searching for and valuing that more. And so, sure, I think if I could go back and I would want to do some of those things differently, or just appreciate more what it was like to be able to go out and, run sub 6 miles, without thinking about it much, even without much exercise. Whereas now I can't do that. At 23 or 24, I ran a marathon, the only marathon I've ever run, with 3 weeks notice because a friend of mine got injured. And that's the kind of thing where when you're that age, you're like, screw it, I'll just go run a marathon in a few weeks. Whereas right now, that is not something I would do, or I could probably finish one, but it would be extremely stupid. And I would pay the price for it for a long time. So, there are things to do when you're young and things to, learn.
Where was the marathon? How'd that turn out?
It was the Marine Corps Marathon. I actually qualified for Boston by 2 seconds. And I also did exactly what you are not supposed to do. I think I ran the first, which was to go out too fast. It was kind of a disaster. I think I ran the first 10 miles in like 56 minutes or something. And it was just like, I was on so much adrenaline, and the person whose bib I had borrowed, I actually did officially change it just so nobody comes after me. But it was like, he was super fast. So I was up with like the Marine Corps people at the front. And so I was like, I'm just going to pace myself. And it was kind of cool though. My parents actually came up and biked along the route, along like Haynes Point and stuff. And I hit that wall. I was just at a crazy pace until like the 21st or 22nd mile, and then screwed up my hip flexor, which I still have to stretch to this day. So it's not a great thing. I think it was 108.58 or something like that. No, that's not right. That can't be right. 08.58. Anyway, whatever it was like, that was my goal, was to qualify for Boston, but then I never ran Boston. People were always like, "Oh, once you run one marathon, you'll do so many more." And I was like, I didn't catch the bug for marathons. It was just like, yeah, I could do that, but I just like, part of it is like the length of time I would have to train. To me, doing like a 10K and trying to get your speed down, or a 10 miler, it's, for me is a more interesting goal than the marathons. But I have a sister-in-law who's done like 20 marathons, probably more than that. So, I'm not saying what works for me needs to work for other people. And then Jonathan, when we were working together, that was when I started doing what I called the midlife crisis runs, the super Spartan Tough Mudder runs. And again, it's just like finding something. It's more for me about what makes working out interesting in the few months before it than the race itself. And particularly when you can't do team sports, which I just think are more fun, but I tend to not be in a position where I could do, then just having something like that really just makes the workouts a little more interesting.
I've had Joe DeSena on this podcast, the founder of Spartan, and I've been on his podcast. I'm curious, what drew you to those types of events, and were you doing them with a group of people? Were you a lone wolf out there in the obstacle course and mud run circuit?
So I was a lone wolf with the intention of not being. The idea was that, I was starting to put a lot of repetitive stress, because most of what I would do was running on a treadmill or running, city runs where I could be. And I did a decent number of 10Ks and 10 milers. And one, I was just bored. And so I wanted something more interesting. And two, I wanted to start cross training more. So I thought those would give me an excuse to kind of start lifting again. I didn't want to get, bulked up, but just to, I'm now at the age where I need back strength so I don't hurt myself. And then the idea was to maybe find a group of friends to do it with. And then because I was bouncing around so much, I ended up not really doing that much cross training, not really getting the team element to it, and then just going out and doing it. I only did a couple, but they were pretty fun. And I do think I appreciate the spirit of it. And my sense is Tough Mudder is a little bit more of the Aussie, let's get drunk afterwards and be chill. And Super Spartan's a little bit more of the CrossFit type energy, but there are other people who are more informed about that. But, it seemed like a good way to, I get the concept of it, and I just haven't been in a place to kind of find a group to train on that.
Tom, do you feel like what we were discussing before we started recording, as it relates to your head shape, was that an advantage or a disadvantage in the world of obstacle course racing? And could you speak to that?
So I was joking that nobody ever forgets the first political cartoon about themselves. And in my case, someone took my perfectly round head and just turned it into a Charlie Brown head, complete with, it was also when I was first having this receding hairline. So it was just really nice to have it capture, I think it was the Roanoke Times, both the roundness of my face and the receding hairline in one image. And you can't forget it. So it can be cruel when it reveals the truth or doesn't. It was another profile, I think it was the George Packer profile, that referred to me as having a Roman jaw. And I was like, oh, that's a much nicer way of saying that I have a fat, round face.
Nice.
I think if things got super Spartan, so to speak, they could have probably cut the head off and used it as like a wheel or a ball at some point, but it never came to that. No.
Let's talk about the George Packer piece just really quickly. He wrote also that you had the build of a college wrestler. Did you wrestle in college, or is that just a description that he used?
I was a high school wrestler. I played soccer and lacrosse and wrestled. And I was almost certainly not good enough to wrestle in college, but it had also just been demoted to a club sport. And it was definitely one of those things that seemed way too intense to do at a club level. My college had great intramurals, so it was a great time to play, pick up hoops and soccer and ultimate and everything else. And that was a lot more fun for me. And also my brother was captain of the Notre Dame lacrosse team. My sister was an All-American and national champion at Princeton. And not only were they much more talented than me athletically, but I had seen that it had really dominated their college experience. And I knew that for me, the social justice work was a big part of what I wanted to be doing, as well as, some of the philosophy work. And so having seen their experience, I knew I didn't want it to be kind of the dominant ethos and organizer of that time. And it helped that I also lacked the talent.
Let's not tell anyone that Yale downgraded its wrestling program, because now they've caused all kinds of problems. But let's just,
it was actually at the time, jokes aside, when because of Title 10, a lot of programs it was one of the ones that was getting reduced at the time for that reason, didn't have the same alumni support network. I don't know the status of it now.
And besides the marathon, have there been other fitness or sporting goals that you have been talked into doing?
Oh, sure. My niece just got me to commit to 300 hours of core this month because she's doing a challenge, 10-minute a day challenge. So that's the most recent one I've committed to. I'm already behind. But no, I mean, I've trained for races with friends and set goals. I'm trying to think of what meets your criteria. We did the Ragnar when I was at Center for American Progress. John Podesta, Clinton's former chief of staff, would organize these Ragnar teams, very serious. He often wins his age group in various 10Ks and 5Ks. That was a funny Ragnar. For those who don't know, your audience probably does. It's these 200-mile races you do with a team, and you're getting in and out of vans all sweaty and handing off through the middle of the night. And it was during one of the government shutdowns, which meant we went 198 and a half miles. But then there was a 1 mile stretch that was through a national park that was, furloughed or whatever. So you went 198 and a half miles, and you had to get in the van for a mile, and then you got to run the last half mile. It was like one of the biggest, disappointing finishes to a race like that. But it was a fun group, and that was good. I don't know what else really qualifies in that. We did have in my family. I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I am right now. And my dad, who grew up in and out of poverty in West Virginia, got a scholarship to come to UVA. So for him, it was always the mecca of the American dream. And they came back here to raise the family. So in my family, at either birth or engagement, you were assigned to the orange team or the blue team for life. And every year, the orange team and the blue team compete throughout the year. And then there's a cup given, the Grasmere Cup at the end of the year. And it's everything from relay races and obstacle courses to charades and puzzles to various things. It's a little amorphous right now. So I think my biggest loyalty at the end of the day is to the orange team for life. And I appreciate Andrew representing for that today.
Obviously. Yeah, I'm riding hard for orange today.
Thank you very much.
Tom, when you've been out there in these Ragnar runs, these Spartan events, what kind of competitor or participant are you? What kind of mood are you in? And how do you show up as a human in the middle of these sporting contests?
So my general attitude is that I'm actually really not very competitive in my professional and personal life about things that matter. And therefore I get very competitive about things that don't matter, like games, because they can be fun and like the outlet there. So in that sense, I will get competitive about things, but not necessarily about the races, because it's very much against yourself. So the nice thing about running is, as if I'm bouncing around the world and doing all this stuff, you're really racing against yourself. You're picking a time to race against. And even with Peloton, which we'll probably end up talking about, you're going against your own PR or your own goals. So I'd say I'm mostly in that stuff, just competitive against myself, unless it's a really silly game, and then I'll get pretty competitive.
And where does skiing fit into this?
Skiing is...
Is that your favorite thing to do?
It is. And I'm late to life in skiing. I didn't ski growing up. But it is, I call it Zen-adrenaline, because it's the only thing in the world where you're in both a Zen space and totally on adrenaline at the same time. Not the only one, but it's very few things where, you can be going 70 miles an hour, one wrong turn and you could die, but you're also in the mountains with the wind blowing. You have these beautiful vistas. That part of your brain, the sort of flow state thing where particularly for someone as ADD as myself, it's one of the few things that can kind of silence everything and focus you in. And there's just, in terms of a reservoir for me, or something that fills the reservoir, there's nothing like it. And the other bonus is that you get these 7-minute, you get the total adrenaline down, and then you can either be kind of reflecting or solving a problem on the way up, or running a focus group every time you're on a lift about things, and you have kind of an audience. So there's something about the flow of that. And where I have been able to, as get away the few times I've been able to kind of check out like that. You can exhaust yourself in 3 hours in the morning, from first runs. And then by noon, you're at the library and you can be writing or reading or reflecting or whiteboarding with just a different kind of energy. Yeah. So skiing is very special to me. I got to it late in life. It is, I ski as if I'm an excellent skier, but I'm not actually an excellent skier. So I'm a very aggressive but underqualified skier. So it's Yeah, it's hard to compare it. I think different sports have parts of that. Certainly if you're on a really good run, you'll get into some of that flow state. But you're not going to have the kind of thanatotic rush, adrenaline rush that you're going to get from, either the speed or the trees or whatever on skiing. So that's definitely its own thing.
Are you getting into backcountry? Are you skinning up to some bulls, or are we talking Aspen Extreme, Powder 8s, Obermeyer jacket type vibe?
I definitely do some hiking. I have a nephew who's become a really good skier who got me back into hiking and hiking up to peaks, usually like either the ones that are on the resorts or right next to the resorts. I've done less backcountry. I was going to actually do some in Tahoe this year where I was based for a couple months after the Sudan gig ended. And frankly, I just wasn't in good enough shape. And I started skiing scared. And I was thinking a lot this spring about how much, talk about the physical and the psychological coming together. I was skiing more scared because I didn't have the quad strength going into it. Because even though I'd stayed in okay shape during the Sudan gig, I certainly wasn't in the kind of shape you'd want to be in to go ripping off, Highland Peak or something at Aspen. So for me, I can enjoy most of it. A good day of just groomers going super fast, trees on a powder day. There's nothing probably better than that. To really go backcountry, I mean, it's a bit of a motivation that I'd like to get in good enough shape to, heli-ski once or cat ski at least, or at least be in a position where you go and do a bunch of backcountry. But again, having not grown up with it, I've been kind of making up for that deficit. And now I'm, practically 1 foot in the grave. But it is something I'd like to do more of. So, yeah.
Just for the record, I think we're all quite close in age here. But you mentioned Sudan. For our listeners, could you just tell them briefly what it means to be the special envoy for Sudan? And again, how did you maintain any semblance of, fitness and cope with the stress of what I think that job would entail?
Yeah, special envoy for Sudan means that I got to be the representative for the United States to the efforts to end the crisis in Sudan. It's one of the largest countries in the world. It's about 50 million people, a huge geographic area, and has a long history, both an incredibly compelling and beautiful history, but also marked by tragedy through the years. So President Biden asked me to come in and serve as the U.S. Special Envoy. And when you're an envoy, usually it means you're leading some sort of peace talks. And that often either means that you're kind of in one place. Like if you think about, say, the Iran negotiations, a lot of that was really technical negotiations. You're in hotels, you're kind of going through the details of whether the border should be here or there, the inspection should be this way or that way. Or it's what's called shuttle diplomacy, which is where you're going from capital to capital every day to meet with the different relevant parties. So in the Sudan case, the war has been going on for over 2 years now, the latest round of war. And not only is there a lot of violence and famine on the ground that makes it hard to be there physically present, it's also that the key actors in that case were both the belligerent parties, but also the neighboring countries who are highly affected by the war and often siding with one side or the other, the Gulf actors, including the Saudis, the Emiratis, to a lesser extent, the Qataris, sometimes, Turkish or European, linkages over time, diaspora communities, et cetera. What does that mean for your purposes? I think I had something like 62 different country visits over a 12-month period last year. That's not 62 countries, but that's country visits. So in this case of shuttle diplomacy, I would often be over, 8 days. I would be going from Kenya to Uganda to Cairo to Abu Dhabi to, Riyadh or whatever. And that often means you're landing at 4 a.m. Your first meeting is 8 a.m. And so from a workout standpoint, you either just have to give up or you have to just be committed and say, yes, the only way I'm going to stay awake in that 8 a.m. meeting is if I actually do get up at 6:30 and do the workout. And so you try to stay active that way. The other is that I've gotten better, though not great, at, in 8-hour plane rides or 13-hour plane rides, not just walking the aisles, but that's when I really try to do my stretching. So, just a little bit more active, doing something that way, but also banking sleep, during that time. And the other thing, which I still am pretty good at, even at my age, is when I'm going through periods that are pretty seriously sleep deprived, I can do 5-minute and 7-minute power naps where I go straight into REM sleep. So all often during those periods, like if I'm riding between meetings, you're often doing multiple phones. So you get one phone, you kind of work those phones, and you're like, all right, I've got 12 minutes to be there. I'm going to nap for 8. And I can only do that when I'm pretty seriously sleep deprived and when I'm staying active. So in those periods, I can go, and people will say I go straight into snoring, whatever. I feel like I'm in a dream state, come out of it in 8 minutes, and you get that, that might get you through the next meeting. I don't recommend this as a lifestyle, but when it's between that or you get into that lethargic mindset where you're like, look, I only have 4 hours to sleep tonight, so I'm going to sleep for 3 hours and 52 minutes. Then, you're just not going to do it. That being said, like, I don't know how people, when you think about John Kerry or Hillary Clinton, both of whom I saw as secretaries of state, I mean, they were well older than me when they were being Secretary of State. They will always be older than me. I understand the tautology of that, but the idea that they would keep up the schedules that they're on and be able to remain as engaged on the details as both of them were is just astounding to me. And I know in Kerry's case, just because it's been more publicized, he does go out and bike and he does go out and exercise even when he's got all of those things going on. So, you've just got to make it a priority. And then often you have a team that's managing you at that point anyway. My team was slightly smaller than theirs. And, if you tell people like, this is not you basically have to say, this is not a negotiable thing to me. This is something that I'm not going to be able to function without at least some element of this. That being said, it's certainly not the same level as, I've had the last couple of months.
Travel seems, as I age, it seems like one of the most brutal things you can do to the human body is put it on an airplane for a long period of time and make people sit. I mean, really in whatever context, whether it's on a plane, sitting there negotiating in a vehicle, it's so rough on the body. And you named a few things that you do to help manage that. And I'm sure listeners are wondering, when Tom would drop into a 7-minute REM sleep nap, what was the protocol for your staff to wake you up from that nap? And what were you like?
So I think that let me just start with the question that was asked. Part of what works in those rides is that there's an end to the ride. It's not like people are going to be like, oh, you got here, we're going to have the foreign minister wait for 30 minutes while you finish your nap. But it also, I mean, in that case, I did most of my travel with this exceptional guy who was many things, but a body man is only part of what he was. He was also a very good strategy and policy advisor named Obaid Obidullah. And he had actually grown up under the Taliban in Afghanistan. He had volunteered to work with our special forces when he was very young, got here on an SIV visa as an American citizen, got his master's, all that sort of thing. And often, like, if I did go to the gym at 4 a.m, he would already be there, like kickboxing and whatever else. And the annoying thing was when I did get frustrated, I want to be like, hey, you fucking believe like it's a plane delay or they lost my luggage or whatever. And then I'd look at him and I'd be like, oh yeah, you've seen actual problems in the world. And I think I'm probably not going to get a lot of sympathy for complaining about, the fact that I didn't get the upgrade this time or whatever else. So, but what you want is a team around, you want to work with a team that kind of gets how the overall flow is. And he was someone who continues to be able to do those kinds of hours. He's younger than me and a better person than me in every way. So, he's working with that. And I think also can understand, like, you develop a rapport where he's going to wake me up when I need to get woken up. But for the most part, your body just knows. If you're in a situation where you're needing to sleep for that period of time, your body is figuring out certain rhythms. And I know there's a lot of science on this, and I'm doing a really poor job of explaining it. But, if you put people in sun deprivation, right, they'll get usually on like a 30-hour cycle instead of a 24-hour cycle. And the same thing, if you're just flying all over the world and you've got these windows here, you tend to adjust. But the other thing, which I guess I've had to come to realize, is that probably what you put in your body is as important as what you're doing with your body. And so there was a time where I would do all of that, and I would also be eating, a burger and fries for the lunch. Like, I'm not an idiot at this point. If I need to stay awake in the afternoon, I'm sure as heck not going to be having, I don't eat red meat or pork anymore anyway, but you're not going to have a heavy lunch. I never understand people who like have wine with lunch. I'm not judging them, but like, how the hell do you stay awake, for the 2 hours after that, if you're not having a siesta? But for other people, that's fine with their metabolism, So it's, so all that's there. I mean, the thing that is actually that has gotten worse for me is the ability to get to sleep when I'm anything other than sleep deprived, because you're often then running on adrenaline, your metabolism's high, and you're like, okay, well, now I have my 3-hour window to sleep, and your body isn't always like, okay, well, then let's do it. Like the 8-minute nap is easier for me than like the 3-hour thing, sometimes, but it depends on the dynamics overall.
We haven't really gotten deeply into the mind game from what Jonathan has shared with me, and he has shared a lot. He mentioned that You've spent some time at meditation retreats. How did that come into your life, and is that still a part of your life today?
I try for it to be. The daily meditation, the weekly meditation has just been kind of a failure for me. And I shouldn't say failure. It is. I've hit a low plateau that is better than where I was. The immersion experience has been easier for me. Not easier, but it's been more applicable. Some of that's, again, I'm kind of a binge person, so the immersion experience is better. I mean, I think that I am someone who believes that our brains on a societal level and an individual level are being affected mostly negatively by technology, social media, et cetera, that is making it harder for us to maintain focus. It's been harder for us to accept deferred gratification. Basically, the idea that we have the dopamine addiction that's numbing us to certain experiences, it makes it harder and harder to interact without that being a factor. When I go back to the Congressional days, it was a point where it was almost like my ADD at that point was an asset, because I remember there was a time, it was the last time they actually let me drive for like a year period, because I was driving with my knee, which is terrible, while I was talking on one phone and tweeting on another phone with, my staff in the car asking questions back and forth. And to some extent, the 34-year-old version of myself could, I felt, maintain those 5 trains of thought at the same time. On the other hand, I think it was not true. Clearly, the driving part is not okay. And I have been disciplined about that. But I think over time, even if you can maintain that for a bit, it is creating very unhealthy patterns in the brain that cannot be sustained. And then it's just like the electrons are flying out, away from the nucleus, and you're not keeping some sort of core. So for me, at least, I felt my attention span was getting worse. My patience was getting worse, which has never been my strong suit. So the first time,
wait, you have patience?
I'm sorry, there was a click in the line. I couldn't hear what you said, Jonathan. So I think that the hope is it's always better if you can build something into your daily routine. Most of my meditation efforts have not worked with that. Whereas some of these times where I've gone away and been technology free, I do feel my brain starting to operate differently. But then I will say, when I've gone into something like the Sudan gig, I would say that the exercise and the diet parts were easier to maintain. But anything like the technology diet or limitations, or even yoga, they just went out the door. But that's me. I'm not saying that is true for other people.
Yeah. So Tom, it sounds like the immersive retreat style experience has brought you a lot. It's helped you to reclaim some of your attention. And I couldn't agree with you more. It seems like in this era, technology uses us. We don't use technology, and not everyone is highly aware of that. And then sometimes people realize this is taking all of my attention, robbing me of presence. And it actually takes effort to reclaim it. And I'm actually in the process of building a consumer technology company that's oriented around the inverse of that proposition. And my goal is to help people reclaim their attention and just to experience how wonderful it is to have the absence of doing anything. And it's not a formal meditation practice. And it sounds like for you, that became a bit too onerous. I don't know what specifically it was, just carving out. A lot of people do 20 minutes of meditation, or they feel they have a need to be in a specific place. But it sounds like that didn't actually work for you. When you do have these immersive experiences, where have you gone, and what kind of experiences or retreats have you sought out?
So probably the one Jonathan's referring to, the first one I ever did that was like that. I think it's fair to say the first one. I'll give one other example, but it was like first year at the foundation. I really felt like I was at rock bottom in a lot of ways. Everyone, all my close friends have been like, you got to do yoga or you got to do meditation. And I was like, I just want to go to the Bahamas, and I'd never been to the Bahamas. So I Google searched yoga, meditation, Bahamas. And I got this place in Nassau that's apparently got a very long history. And I went there for 10 days. And it was the kind of thing where it was one of those moments where it felt like, if I don't do something like this, I'm just not going to do it at all. And, part of why I haven't, I had a lot of hangups about it for a long time. And one was this sense of just like the over the top cultural appropriation and seemingly performativeness that I'd always associated with white people doing yoga and, that whole kind of scene. And I just I didn't, and just always felt inauthentic. And, I went to that place and it would have been easy for me to focus on the 6 or 8 most ridiculous people who easily could have, played into that type. Or you just choose to either block it out, which I did some of, or, connect with the most authentic people. And I think this is what we all know in our lives, is that, we can choose to surround ourselves or to focus on positive energy versus negative energy. Now, we don't totally have power over that. I think one of the social media problems is, if there's an article about you and there are 50 positive comments and 1 negative comment, there are very few people in the world who are not going to over remember the negative comment, particularly if that negative comment touches on something that you already are insecure about or whatever. There's just something in most human nature. And most of the people who can do that, frankly, are problematic in the other direction in their ability to block things out. But we have some ability to affect how much we want to focus on the negative versus positive. And quite frankly, we all know this from exercise, because there are lots of times where, there are times you're just very excited to exercise. There are times you just don't feel like doing it. And almost every time, not every time, but I would say like over 90% of the time you force yourself to exercise, you feel good about it afterwards. And so I've always been better at that in the physical health space than the mental health space. And the question is, what is the mental health equivalent of I feel like shit, I don't feel like going for a run today, but I know I'm going to feel better if I do. So I got to suck it up and go run. And, for some people, I think that's meditation. I don't do well sitting still, and I don't do well with focus. And so I've just tended to find when I do that form of meditation, I just end up wanting to punch myself in the face after a couple minutes. Going back to skiing, one of the things I like about, I've come to like skiing alone a lot. And one of the reasons is that you can ride up and it's like a 7-minute meditation, and it's like can be a 7-minute meditation when you're already on adrenaline enough from the rush that I don't feel too passive. It's like my body's in the right space. I know it's going to end soon. And that's about the longest that I can try to, clear my brain for something like that. But I may just be that I need to come to more creative places. There's a place not far from Charlottesville called Yogaville that was one of the first places in the US during the 60s or something, and has maintained it. We worked with them on blocking this pipeline that was trying to go through Shenandoah. Been there a couple times and things. I went out to that one that's not far from San Francisco, Ursaville or whatever. I was a little underwhelmed by that place, but it's you gotta find your tribe, find your people.
You're making these ski trips sound like Fast and the Furious Part 10. I mean, it sounds like 110% pure adrenaline, and then you get the chairlift ride. And I think that's kind of what this interview has been, or this conversation, Tom. So we just want to thank you for making time to join us here today on the United States of Sweat for the benefit of all. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jonathan.
For senior executives, professional athletes, and political leaders, podcasts aren't optional anymore. They are mission critical. At One Real Voice, I coach leaders one-on-one to help them thrive as storytellers and stand out in the long-form podcast conversations where real influence is built. When you're ready to be great, DM me at HardwayPod or email hello@onerealvoice.com. Thank you to my sponsors, blockchain.com, Lauf Cycles, and Palm Tree Podco, my podcasting partner, for their support. See you next time on Choose the Hard Way.